The rain fell incessantly, pounding against the windows of Isabel's old car as she drove down the deserted road. The sound of the raindrops against the glass mixed with the roar of the engine, creating a symphony of solitude and mystery. The young journalist's destination was clear: the Gonzales Hotel, an old hotel in the heart of Gonzales, Texas, shrouded in legends and ghost stories that no one dared to tell in detail. Isabel didn't believe in ghosts. To her, it was all superstition, cheap folklore created by weak minds to justify the fear of the unknown. But in her quest for intriguing stories for her new book on haunted places in the United States, she couldn't help but feel drawn to the dark fame of the Gonzales Hotel. The hotel, known for its Victorian structure and walls laden with old stories, had closed its doors many years ago. However, rumors of ghostly apparitions and inexplicable events had never ceased. And for Isabel, a good story isn't built without courage, without diving into the depths of what others fear. She parked the car in front of the hotel, a towering building that seemed to resist the passage of time. The facade was worn, the paint faded, and the windows were dusty, but something about the structure made her feel a pressure in her chest, as though the hotel itself was waiting for her. Isabel took a deep breath, grabbed her backpack and made her way to the entrance where the door, strangely, was ajar. With a push she entered. The smell of mildew and old wood filled the air. The main entrance was dominated by a massive crystal chandelier, whose pieces of glass sparkled even in the faint light that escaped from the extinguished lamps. The wooden floor creaked beneath her steps, and the living room, with furniture covered by white sheets, was completely silent. The only light came from a dim lamp in the corner of the room, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Isabel was accustomed to abandoned places, but something about this hotel was different. The air felt dense and she had the distinct sensation of being watched, even though she was alone. She moved forward, exploring the corridor ahead of her. The old decor, the worn tapestries, and the portraits of ancestors that seemed to gaze at her with penetrating eyes created a heavy and uncomfortable atmosphere. It was as if the hotel's history had been written into every brick, every speck of dust that gathered in the dark corners. At the end of the corridor, a door stood out, slightly ajar, as if inviting Isabel to enter. She hesitated for a moment, but curiosity pulled her in. With a sigh, she pushed the door open. Inside the room, a canopy bed was positioned in the center, with yellowed and heavy sheets. But what caught her attention the most was the man sitting at the table, with his back to her. He appeared old, with gray hair and an old-fashioned suit that seemed out of place in modern times. Isabel stood still at the door, watching him for a moment. There was something about him that made her uncomfortable, as though the very air around him was charged with something sinister. "You're Isabel, aren't you?" The man's voice was soft, yet carried a strange authority. Isabel took a step forward, feeling her body tense with anxiety. "Yes, that's me. How did you know?" The man slowly turned, his deep, penetrating eyes locking onto hers. He had a tired expression, as though he had been waiting for her for a long time. "I'm Mr. Alvarez," he said with a slight bow, "and I've been expecting your visit." Isabel's reaction was a mix of surprise and suspicion. How could someone expect her without her having notified them? She took another step forward, unsure of what to do next but unwilling to back away. "I'm here to write about the hotel. I've heard some interesting stories about it," Isabel said, trying to disguise the apprehension in her voice. Mr. Alvarez smiled faintly, but his smile seemed sad, as if he were aware of something she had yet to understand. "I knew you would come. But you're not prepared for the history of this place. Not even you." Isabel felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean by that?" She couldn't hide the tone of skepticism, but something in his gaze made her curiosity grow. This hotel, like all other places, has its secrets. And those secrets are not just stories to scare tourists. They are real, my dear. He stood up from the chair, his gaze never leaving Isabel's. "I am the guardian of this hotel's history, the last living person who knows its true origin." Isabel swallowed hard. She knew she was at a crossroads. If she continued the conversation, she would dive into something that could change her life forever. But the spirit of investigation urged her to continue. "Tell me everything," she said, with more firmness than she actually felt. Mr. Alvarez walked to the window and looked outside, where the rain seemed to show no sign of stopping. He took a deep breath before beginning. Many years ago, the Gonzales Hotel was one of the most famous and luxurious in the region. It was founded by a man named Richard Carmichael. He was a powerful businessman, owner of land and businesses throughout the state of Texas. But Carmichael had a dark nature, an insatiable desire for power and control. He turned to Isabel, his eyes now more intense. Richard Carmichael was no ordinary man. He used the hotel as a front for his sinister activities. Many like you don't know the true cost of his wealth. Isabel wasn't sure what to expect, but Mr. Alvarez's tone suggested she was about to hear something much more macabre than any legend she had ever heard. Carmichael made pacts with forces beyond human comprehension. He didn't just kill those who opposed him, but he also offered their souls to something much older and more powerful. The room seemed to darken further as Mr. Alvarez spoke, and Isabel felt the weight of his words taking shape. But he paid a price. What he did to the hotel left marks. And the ghosts of his victims still walked these halls, seeking revenge. Isabel felt a lump form in her throat. Revenge? Mr. Alvarez nodded slowly, his eyes locked on Isabel. Yes. And you, my dear, are about to become part of this story. Those who enter here, drawn by curiosity or greed, do not leave unscathed. The spirits of Carmichael and his victims take over those who dare to approach. Isabel felt a wave of dread, but her determination to uncover the truth kept her from backing down. What happens to those who stay here too long? They disappear, Mr. Alvarez said, his voice now so low it was barely audible. And their souls are trapped here forever. Isabel felt a shiver run through her body. What Mr. Alvarez was saying was surreal, but the atmosphere in the hotel seemed so heavy with tension and mystery that she could barely breathe. She was starting to realize that this place was not just a ghost story told by tourists, but something much darker and more real. And you? Isabel asked, her voice faltering. Are you also trapped here? Mr. Alvarez looked at her for a moment, as if evaluating her words. He then slowly approached, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silent room. I am the last remnant of a long line of guardians, he replied, his voice low and drawn out. I was chosen to maintain the hotel, to take care of it. And no matter how hard I try, I cannot escape. None of us can. The silence lingered in the room, and Isabel felt the heavy burden of Mr. Alvarez's fate settle onto her shoulders. She wanted to ask more, to understand fully what was happening, but an increasing sense of discomfort prevented her from continuing. There was something wrong. Something she still couldn't comprehend, but it made her feel like her very body was in danger. How do you know all of this? Isabel asked, trying to hide the apprehension in her voice. Because I lived the story, Mr. Alvarez replied, his voice now darker. I lived through what Carmichael did. I saw the lost souls, the people who disappeared, the screams that echoed through the walls. I was a witness and now I am part of it. I am the last soul who can still tell the truth. Isabel swallowed hard. Each word seemed to pierce her heart. She was facing something that went beyond anything she had ever investigated or imagined. The hotel, with its imposing, abandoned facade, wasn't just a haunted place. It was a prison, and the prisoners were not just ghosts, but the souls of real people who had been condemned to eternal vigilance. And what happens to those who enter and get lost here? Isabel asked, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. Mr. Alvarez watched her with an empty expression, as if reflecting on his own fate. They become part of the story. It doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, or what they seek. If you stay here too long, if you are weak enough to succumb to fear or curiosity, you will be absorbed. His last word echoed in the air, laden with a weight Isabel couldn't comprehend. She took a deep breath, trying to keep control. The curiosity in her heart was transforming into a mix of fear and despair. She knew she needed to get out of there, but she couldn't take the first step. The hotel was draining her energy, her courage. Something invisible was keeping her there, forcing her to continue, to listen, to discover more. You can't leave, said Mr. Alvarez, as if reading her thoughts. No one leaves when the story begins to unfold. The hotel decides who stays and who goes. Isabel, a mix of anger and desperation, turned toward the door, intending to run. But to her surprise, the door was locked. She tried to open it, but the doorknob turned uselessly. The hotel was indeed preventing her escape. You're telling me I'm trapped here? Isabel shouted, her voice now louder, filled with panic. Mr. Alvarez didn't respond immediately. He just watched, his unreadable eyes as if waiting for her to understand on her own. Then he finally spoke, his voice soft and chilling. Yes, you are trapped. The hotel chose you, Isabel. The hotel chooses who will be its next secret. The feeling of claustrophobia overcame Isabel. She tried to find a way out, but the walls seemed to be closing in around her. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, turning into a distant roar, as if the very sky were disintegrating. And then, something strange happened. Isabel looked to the corner of the room and saw a shadow move. At first she thought it was just a reflection from the dim lights or a trick of her mind. But when the shadow materialized into an indistinct figure, her body froze. A woman, tall and pale, with black hair and eyes reflecting the darkness of the abyss, appeared before her. Isabel stepped back, shocked, but the figure didn't move. It only watched her with a vacant and deep stare, as if waiting for Isabel to recognize something. Who are you?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It only pointed toward the door, as if urging Isabel to follow. But before Isabel could react, the figure vanished into the darkness of the corridor. Without thinking, Isabel ran back to the door, pulling the doorknob with force. This time it gave way and the door slowly opened. The corridor before her was empty, but the air felt colder than before. And although she couldn't see anything beyond the darkness, she felt that something or someone was watching her. She hesitated. The figure, the man. Mr. Alvarez had said that the hotel chose its victims. Was he telling the truth? She felt terrified, but something pushed her to move forward, to explore the darkness, to learn the truth. With a hesitant step, she entered the corridor and began to walk. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty walls. As she advanced, the smell of mold and aged wood grew stronger, and the feeling of being watched intensified. At the end of the corridor, a door stood out. Somehow, Isabel knew that this was where everything would begin to make sense. She approached the door and opened it cautiously. The room inside was dark, with a single candle burning in the center. Around it, old paintings of unknown people hung on the walls, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Isabel entered the room and looked around. When her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw, sitting in a chair in the corner, the same pale woman from before. She looked at Isabel with an enigmatic expression and finally spoke. "You can't escape," she said, her voice sounding as though it came from another world. Isabel felt the blood freeze in her veins. What is happening here?" The woman smiled, but it was a cold, lifeless smile. "The history of the hotel is older than you imagine. The hotel feeds on the fears and souls of those who visit it. And now you are part of it, Isabel." Isabel felt the pressure on her chest increase. She knew she was getting closer to the truth, but she also feared that, by fully understanding what was going on there, she might no longer be able to escape. The tension in the room grew, and Isabel felt the weight of the woman's words like an overwhelming burden. What had she done by entering this hotel? What was really happening there? Her mind was clouded, the line between the real and the supernatural beginning to fade. "You still don't understand, do you?" The woman slowly stood from the chair and took a step toward Isabel. Each of her movements seemed charged with an energy that made the room feel even tighter, more suffocating. "The hotel is not just a place of death. It is a portal, a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead." Isabel tried to take a step back, but her legs felt heavy, as if something was preventing her from moving. The air, which had once seemed to be in motion, now felt still, almost oppressive. She looked at the woman, who continued to walk toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Why are you telling me this?" Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman stopped just a few inches from Isabel, and the scent of a withered flower and decay filled her nostrils. Her eyes, once hollow and dark, now seemed clearer, as if a hidden truth was being revealed. "Because you need to understand that by entering here you made a choice. The hotel chooses those who are curious, those who cannot resist its call. You are not just being watched, Isabel. You are being tested." "Tested?" Isabel asked, not believing what she was hearing. "Tested for what?" The woman smiled again, a smile that had nothing welcoming about it. "You want to know the truth about Carmichael? About what happened here? About the fate of those who stayed in this hotel? Then you need to pass the test. Only those who survive the trial will be allowed to leave. The others will stay here forever." Isabel's heart raced. She felt dizzy, as if the floor was about to open beneath her feet. "And what happens to those who fail? What happens to them?" The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned, looking at the shadows in the corner of the room, as if something else was lurking there, waiting. "They become part of the story," she finally said, her voice filled with hidden meanings. "Their souls will be trapped here, just like the souls of Carmichael's victims. The hotel devours them. And they become its own ghosts, condemned to repeat their worst moments, always searching for an exit that will never come." Isabel felt a shiver run up her spine. She knew the hotel was somehow feeding off people's fear and curiosity, but she didn't know how cruel it could be. Every word from the woman seemed to fill her with a sense of inevitability, as if everything she did now would be in vain. "You cannot leave without facing what happened here," the woman said with an almost fierce firmness. The hotel demands it from you. Without further explanation, the woman began to walk back to the corner of the room, where the shadowy figure moved with a life of its own. Isabel looked toward the back of the room and for the first time, noticed a door she hadn't seen before. It was an old, worn door, apparently made of solid wood, but its edges were covered with deep marks, as if something had tried to escape from within. The door seemed to radiate a dark energy, as if it were the only way for her to find answers. But at the same time she felt that crossing it would mark a point of no return. As if she were leaving behind everything she knew about the real world and surrendering herself to the unknown. With no other choice, Isabel took a step toward the door. As she approached, the sound of her breathing grew louder, heavier, and the room seemed to begin spinning. When her hands touched the doorknob, a chill ran through her, and an invisible force seemed to pull her inside. She turned the doorknob and entered. Inside the room, a cold wind enveloped her, and the shadows began to stir. The atmosphere felt alive, with the air itself charged with a dense energy, as if time there had been distorted. The room was empty, except for an old rocking chair that moved gently, as if someone had just gotten up. Isabel looked around and that's when she saw it. A hooded figure, with its back to her, stood near a window. The faint light of the candle burning on the table cast a long, distorted shadow across the room. Fear overtook Isabel, but she felt the need to approach, as if that figure held the key to everything. "You're here," the figure spoke, its voice deep and raspy. It wasn't a man but a presence, something that had transcended the human body. Isabel didn't know how, but she knew this was the soul of Carmichael. "Richard Carmichael," Isabel whispered, her voice faltering. Are you here?" The figure slowly turned, and Isabel saw a face that seemed to have been worn by time. The features of a man who had been marked by guilt, by madness. His eyes, empty and lifeless, reflected the horror of a forgotten but eternal past. Carmichael's face had no humanity left. He was a shadow of himself, a fusion between the man and the monster he had become. "You want to understand, don't you?" Carmichael said, his voice hissing like a distant whisper. "You want to understand why the hotel feeds. Why it drags those who are attracted to its story." Isabel, swallowing her fear, took a step forward. "Yes, I need to know. I want to understand what happened. What you did here." Carmichael smiled, a dark smile, as if he were enjoying her curiosity. "I did what I had to do. What the hotel asked me to do," he said with a cutting coldness. "I brought souls. And when the hotel got what it wanted, it took me. And now you are here. You are next." Isabel looked around desperately. The room was transforming before her eyes, the floor beginning to crack and the air growing heavier. She knew she had to act. The only way out would be to confront the hotel, the truth behind its decaying walls, or become yet another lost soul among the shadows. How can I leave?" Isabel screamed, panic beginning to take over her body. But Carmichael only watched her with his cruel smile. "You can't leave. Not before you pay the price." The air felt dense, as if the hotel was trapping every breath Isabel took, leaving her weak. The floor cracked beneath her feet, and the shadows around her seemed to stretch, swallowing everything in their path. Carmichael was still smiling, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who had been condemned to eternity, just like those he had dragged into this place. Isabel didn't know what to do. She was in a nightmare, surrounded by forces beyond her understanding, but something inside her still fought. She couldn't be just another lost soul. She couldn't let the hotel have what it wanted. With tremendous effort, she took a step forward, trying to ignore the icy sensation running down her spine. Her eyes were fixed on Carmichael, but she also knew the real power wasn't in him. The hotel was the real entity here. The hotel was the monster. And Carmichael? He was just a puppet, just like she could become. "I won't be your prisoner," Isabel shouted, with more courage than she thought she had. Carmichael's reaction was an even wider smile, but the look in his eyes became empty, as if he was a shadow instead of a man. He raised his hand and pointed to the door Isabel had come through. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and cavernous. "You've already made your choice. The hotel decides who stays and who goes. And you already belong to it." Isabel felt her mind spin. Carmichael's words were laced with a distorted truth, but she couldn't allow fear to take over. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather all her strength. She had come this far to tell the story, to face what the world had ignored. She couldn't become another soul lost in the dirty, decaying walls of that place. Isabel took a deep breath and in a quick move, ran to the broken window at the back of the room. The wind outside cut through her skin like sharp knives, but she didn't hesitate. Each second felt like an eternity. The window was locked, but she forced it open with her hands, using the strength of her determination. When the window finally opened, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the room, like a scream from the hotel itself. And then, with her heart pounding and blood pulsing through her veins, Isabel leapt to the outside. The fall was quick. The cold air wrapped around her, and she felt the weight of her own resistance to all the terror the hotel represented. The feeling of freedom, of being away from that place, was like a balm to her soul. She hit the ground, her body aching but alive. When she lifted her eyes, the hotel stood before her, immense and dark, like a shadow that could never be erased. But Isabel knew she had escaped. She had broken the cycle, challenged the power of the hotel, and escaped the clutches of Carmichael and the lost souls. The hotel, no matter how strong, couldn't defeat her. She struggled to her feet, glancing back only once at the window where the lights still glowed, like a promise that, deep down, the hotel story would never be forgotten. But Isabel was free. Free to tell the truth, to put an end to that story so that no one else would be drawn into the darkness of the Gonzales Hotel. And so, she went on her way, knowing that the truth was now in her hands, and that the nightmare of that place would no longer be a legend told in the shadows.